The smell of fresh-cut grass hit me before I even opened the car door. That's the thing about late August in Virginia. The air carries everything at once. Heat, honeysuckle, the faint diesel from the road. I sat in the parking lot of St. Lee, Andrews Presbyterian, for 3 full minutes before I turned off the engine. Just sat there watching people I hadn't seen in years file through the front doors in their summer dresses and pressed linen shirts. My cousin Elise was getting married. 29 years old, same as me. We'd grown up 4 houses apart on Millbrook Road, split the same babysitter, learned to ride bikes in the same cul-de-sac. For the first 18 years of my life, she'd been the person I called when anything happened. Good, bad, confusing, terrifying. Then I enlisted. Not because I had to. Not because I had no options. I enlisted because I wanted to, because something in me had always been drawn to the structure and the purpose and, honestly, the challenge. I was 22, a year out of community college, working at a shipping warehouse and feeling like the walls were closing in. My recruiter was a woman named Sergeant First Class. I still think of her by her rank, not her name, which tells you something about how that conversation went, and by the time I left her office, I had already made up my mind. My mother's reaction was not what I expected. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just went very quiet and looked at me across the kitchen table the way you look at someone who has said something you're not sure you heard correctly. "You could have gone back to school," she said. "I know. You could have asked your uncle about the position at his firm." "I know, Mom." She turned back to the dishes. That was it. That was the whole conversation. My stepfather didn't say much either, but he had a different way of not saying things, the kind where the silence had a specific shape to it. A disappointed shape. He'd been an accountant for 30 years and believed, genuinely believed, that a respectable life meant a desk in a 401k in a neighborhood where the HOA actually enforced the rules about lawn height. The military, in his view, was something you ended up in, not something you chose. My brother was the worst. He was 25 at the time, already in his 2nd year of law school, already carrying himself like he'd accomplished something significant. He laughed when I told him. Not a mean laugh, almost worse, actually. The kind of laugh that means you're not being serious. "Cass," he said, "my name is Cassidy, but everyone calls me Cassie. You know they're going to make you clean bathrooms, right? Like, literal toilet scrubbing, that's what basic training is." "I know what basic training is. I'm just saying, you have other options." I didn't argue with him. I'd learned early that arguing with my brother was like trying to have a conversation with a wall that had a law degree. He didn't change his mind through discussion. He changed his mind, if he changed it at all, through evidence. Facts on the ground. Undeniable outcomes. I decided to give him some. Basic was Fort Jackson, South Carolina. 11 weeks. I will not romanticize it. There were mornings I woke up at 4:30, convinced that some fundamental error in the universe had placed me in this life and not another one. There were runs where my lungs felt like wet paper. There were nights I lay on my bunk and talked to the ceiling and asked it very quietly why I thought this was a good idea. But there were also other things. There was the morning, 6 weeks in, when something clicked, when the fatigue became background noise and I realized I was stronger than I had been and that I had done that. There was the camaraderie that is genuinely impossible to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. The way a group of people who have been through something hard together carry that connection in their bodies even decades later. There was the sense, for the first time in my life, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I graduated. I was assigned to Fort Campbell. I went to Warrant Officer Candidate School 3 years later. I specialized in aviation, helicopter maintenance and operations, specifically. I flew. Not combat missions in those early years, but I flew, I trained others, I moved up. In 11 years, I made Chief Warrant Officer 3. I know most people reading this don't know what that means, so I'll explain it simply. It means I was recognized, formally and officially, as an expert in my field. It means I had more responsibility than most people my age in any profession. It means the Army looked at my work and said this person is exceptionally good at what she does and put it in writing and on my sleeve. I never told my family when any of it happened. Not because I was ashamed, but because every time I tried, there was this particular quality to their responses. A kind of polite disinterest. Like when you describe a dream to someone and you can see them waiting for you to finish so they can talk about something else. My mother would say, "That's good, honey," and change the subject. My stepfather would nod and ask if I had a pension plan. My brother once asked, when I mentioned a deployment, if I was doing anything important over there or just like support stuff. Support stuff. I did not throw my phone across the room. I am proud of that restraint. Elise's wedding invitation came in the spring. I was stateside, between assignments, living in a rental in Clarksville, Tennessee, that I had furnished mostly from estate sales and one very productive Saturday at a Goodwill. I pinned the invitation to my refrigerator and looked at it for about 2 weeks before I RSVP'd yes. I knew it would be complicated. My mother would be there, my stepfather, my brother and his girlfriend, who was very beautiful and very confident and had, on 2 separate occasions, referred to the military as not really for smart people, and then looked at me and said, "No offense." Obviously, I had taken no offense. Visibly. The week before the wedding, I got a call from my mother. "I wanted to talk to you about what you're planning to wear," she said. Something in me went careful. I was thinking my dress uniform. Silence. "Mom." "It's Elise's day, Cassidy. I know it's Elise's day. And you know how your stepfather feels about making things about the military. I wouldn't be making it about anything. It's what I wear to formal occasions. It's appropriate. It draws attention. So does a nice dress. That's kind of the point of formal wear." She sighed. That specific sigh, the one she'd been doing since I was 7, the one that meant, "Why do you always have to make this harder than it needs to be? I just think it would be easier if you wore something else, something normal, something normal." I stayed on the phone for another 4 minutes, mostly listening, and when we hung up I sat very still at my kitchen table for a while. The uniform was hanging in the closet in the spare room. I'd had it pressed specifically for the wedding. Chief Warrant Officer 3 insignia on the shoulders, service ribbons on the chest, including the Air Medal, which I had received after a rescue operation in conditions I don't fully discuss with people who aren't cleared to know the details. The uniform was not a costume. It was not a statement. It was the most honest thing I owned. I thought about what my mother said. Then I thought about 11 years. Then I went to bed. The morning of the wedding, I got dressed. Dress uniform. Every piece of it. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment, not checking myself the way you check yourself before a date or a job interview, just looking. The way you look at something that is simply true. I drove to St. Andrew's Presbyterian. I sat in the parking lot for 3 minutes. Then I got out of the car. I heard it before I saw it. The shift in sound that happens when a room full of people all notice the same thing at once. It's not loud. It's actually very quiet. A dropping off of conversation. A series of small silences colliding into one larger one. I was still in the vestibule when it started. Through the open sanctuary doors, I could see the pews, the flowers, the late August light coming through the stained glass. About 130 people dressed in their summer best. Elise's side of the family, a lot of overlap with mine, and her fiancé's people, who I mostly didn't know. I walked in. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I don't want to make it sound more dramatic than it was in experience, even if the facts of it are dramatic. I walked in. People turned. That's what happened. But then something else happened. From across the sanctuary, near the right side of the room, a man stood up. He was maybe 60, silver-haired, in a dark suit. He stood up straight, and he looked at me. I recognized what he was doing before I could consciously name it. A veteran's posture, the particular alignment of the spine. Then the man next to him stood. Then 2 women in the row behind. Then, one by one, in no coordinated way that I could see, just organically, the way these things happen among people who share a language, 8 more people in that room stood up. 11 people in that room stood up. 11 people, total. Veterans. I couldn't have told you their branches from across the room, but I could tell you what they were just from the way they held themselves. You know. You always know. One of them. The silver-haired man who had stood first put his hand over his heart. I stopped walking. I don't know for how long, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 5. Long enough that I was aware of the stopping, aware of the specific quality of quiet in the room, aware that somewhere in the fifth or sixth row my mother was very still and my brother had his hand on the back of the pew in front of him. I collected myself. I nodded once, not a salute. We don't do that out of uniform context, but a recognition, a mutual one, and I found my seat. My cousin Elise got married beautifully. The ceremony was 35 minutes and her vows made two people in the row behind me cry, which I think is the right amount of crying for a wedding ceremony. Her husband, his name is Marcus, and he coaches high school baseball and has the kind of laugh that makes you feel like everything is going to be fine, cried too, briefly, which went a long way with me. At the reception, which was in the fellowship hall connected to the church, there was a buffet with brisket and 3 kinds of potato salad, which is the correct way to do a Virginia August wedding. I found a seat at a table near the windows. The silver-haired man came and found me about 20 minutes into the reception. His name was Gerald. He'd done 22 years, Army, infantry, retired as a sergeant major. He shook my hand and introduced me to his wife, who had also served Nurses Corps, 12 years. They'd met at Fort Bragg in 1987. He said it like a fact he was still proud of. We talked for probably 40 minutes. Other veterans came over. That's the thing nobody tells you about wearing a uniform in a civilian setting. You become a kind of gravity. People come to you, not because you're important, but because you represent something they recognize. A shared thing. A common language. I had 3 different conversations about aviation that afternoon. I talked to a man who'd been a crew chief on Black Hawks in the Gulf. I talked to a woman, Elise's fiancé's aunt, who'd done 2 tours as a medic and was now a PA in Richmond. I talked to a retired Air Force officer who asked me very specific questions about the CW3 promotion timeline that told me he'd done his research before coming over. I was not, in any of these conversations, support stuff. My brother found me near the cake table, which, in retrospect, was a mistake in terms of timing, because I had just had a really good piece of cake and was feeling charitable toward the world. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He stood there for a moment. He's tall, my brother, 6'2", which he did not get from our mother's side, and he has a habit when he's uncertain of putting his hands in his pockets and looking slightly to the left of whoever he's talking to. He was doing that now. "I saw what happened when you came in," he said. "Yeah. Those were all veterans?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. Did the thing with his gaze, slightly left of my shoulder. "I didn't know you were a CW3. I've mentioned it. I know. I didn't know what that meant." I looked at him. He was being honest, which was its own kind of thing, because my brother did not traffic in admissions of not knowing. It cost him something, I could see that. "It means I'm pretty good at my job," I said. He almost smiled. "I looked it up. After you came in. On my phone." "You Googled my rank during Elise's wedding?" "I Googled your rank during Elise's wedding," he confirmed. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but I did. He did too, a little, and it was the first genuine thing we'd done in the same room in probably 6 years. "The promotion rates are really low," he said. "CW3, I saw the statistics. They are. And you fly helicopters?" "I fly, and I maintain, and I train people to do both." He looked at me then. Actually at me, not the left of me. "I've been kind of an idiot," he said. It was not a rousing apology. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and a little awkward. And he said it the way you say something that's been sitting in your chest for longer than you'd like to admit. I could have pushed it further, made him account for specific moments, made him say it more fully and completely. Some part of me wanted to. But I thought about the people who had stood up when I walked into that room. Not because they owed me anything, not because I had asked them to, but because they recognized something, and recognition was enough. "Yeah," I said. "A little bit." He nodded. We ate cake. It was a start. My mother came to find me later, when the dancing had started and most people had moved to the floor or to the bar. She looked at me the way she'd been looking at me from across the room all day, like she was recalculating something, rearranging facts she thought she already had in the right order. "Can we sit for a minute?" she said. We sat. For a moment, she just watched the dancing. Elise and Marcus doing something that was not quite a waltz but had good intentions. The flower girl, who was about 4 and extremely serious about her duties, methodically eating a dinner roll in the corner. When I was young, my mother said, I thought I knew what a good life looked like. For a woman, for my daughter. She paused. It looked a certain way. It had certain shapes, you know? I know. I was afraid for you. When you enlisted, I was afraid for you. When you enlisted, I was afraid in a way I didn't know how to say, so I said it wrong. I looked at her. She was watching the flower girl now, not me. What were you afraid of? I asked. That you'd get hurt. Simple. Direct. More direct than she'd been all day. That something would happen and I wouldn't be able to reach you. And then, when nothing happened, when you were fine. When you were more than fine. I didn't know how to go back and undo the way I'd been. How to say I'd been wrong without admitting I'd been afraid. Which felt like weakness. Being afraid isn't weakness. I know that. Now. It took me longer than it should have. The song changed. Something slower. A few couples leaned into each other. I'm proud of you, she said. Still not quite looking at me. I should have been saying that all along. I was proud of you and I was scared and I confused the two and I let the scared one do the talking. I didn't say anything for a moment. 3 words. I'm proud of you. People underestimate what 3 specific words in the right order can do to a person. I had received commendations. I had received formal written recognition from commanding officers. I had been told in official language that my performance exceeded standards and reflected credit upon myself and the Army. None of that had ever hit me the way those 3 words, from my mother in a church fellowship hall smelling of brisket and wedding flowers, hit me that evening. I put my hand over hers on the table. Thank you, I said. Not it's okay. Not forget it. Because it hadn't entirely been okay, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But the thank you was genuine. It was. The silver-haired man, Gerald, found me again near the end of the evening on his way out. His wife was pulling on her jacket. He shook my hand again and said, You wore it right. That's all I'll say. You wore it exactly right. I thanked him. On the drive home, I had the windows down. That late August Virginia air, still warm but with something in it now that wasn't there in the morning, some early edge of what would eventually become September. I had the radio on low. I was not replaying the day in my mind in some triumphant way. I was just driving. My phone had a text from Elise. You were the most badass thing at my wedding, and I say that having just slow danced with my husband for 20 minutes straight, so please know what high praise that is. I laughed by myself in the car. The thing about wearing your uniform isn't the statement it makes to other people, though it makes one. It's what it means to wear it correctly, to not fold it up and put it in a bag under the seat because someone else would be more comfortable if you did, to carry what you've built and not apologize for the carrying. Some things you keep quiet about because the work speaks for itself and you don't need it any louder. But some things you wear. I drove home with the windows down. The stars over the interstate were the same ones I'd looked up at from Fort Campbell on night runs, from the flight line, from base housing, from every corner of a life I had chosen for myself and built 1 year at a time. They weren't more beautiful now than they'd been then. They were just mine. That felt like enough. That felt like more than enough. I've thought a lot about what actually changed that day. Not in the room. The room was just one afternoon. I mean what changed in the longer arc of things, the version of events you can only see clearly when you're far enough away from them. My brother didn't become a different person because 11 veterans stood up in a church in Virginia. My mother didn't suddenly undo years of not knowing how to say what she felt. Those things don't work that way. What happened was simpler and also harder than a transformation. People were forced, by circumstances they didn't control, to see something they'd been choosing not to look at. The uniform did that. Not because it was a symbol meant to prove a point, but because it was honest. It was the most accurate thing I could have walked in wearing, and accuracy, when you've been surrounded by a particular kind of comfortable vagueness for long enough, lands like a disruption. That's the thing about building a life on your own terms when the people around you don't understand those terms. You're not doing it to teach them a lesson. You're not walking into rooms in your dress uniform to make anyone feel anything specific, but the work you do, done long enough and honestly enough, eventually becomes undeniable. Not loudly, not all at once. It just becomes a fact that exists in the room whether anyone's comfortable with it or not. I think about the 11 years between enlisting and that wedding, the early mornings that had nothing romantic about them, the promotions I didn't announce because no one in my family would have known what to celebrate, the deployment I came back from and told no one about for 3 weeks because I didn't know how to start that conversation. All of that was mine. I carried it, and I didn't carry it perfectly. There were years I was angry about being invisible to my own family in ways I didn't let myself fully admit. Anger is honest too. Pretending it isn't there doesn't make you the bigger person. It just makes you someone who hasn't dealt with their anger yet. What I learned, slowly and not gracefully, is that you can't build your self-worth on the foundation of someone else's recognition. Gerald didn't stand up in that church because I needed him to. He stood up because that's what you do when you've been trained to honor the rank and what it represents. The recognition was real. It was also, fundamentally, beside the point. I had already done the work. The standing was just an acknowledgement of what already existed. My mother said she'd confused pride with fear, and I'd sat with that for a while. She's probably right. The people who make us feel smallest are often the ones most afraid of watching us fail, and when they can't separate that fear from their love, both things come out sideways. That doesn't excuse it. It explains it, which is different. Understanding why something happened doesn't mean pretending it didn't cost you anything. It cost me things. Years of phone calls where I kept the most important parts of my life to myself. A version of closeness with my family that I may never fully recover because some distance, once established, just becomes the shape of a relationship. But I drove home with the windows down. That's also true. And somewhere in the balance between what was lost and what was finally said, there was enough room for something that felt like the beginning of something better. Not perfect. Just better. And sometimes that's the most honest thing you can ask for.